welcome back to Get Even. I'm Dr. Nora Koslowski, co-founder of Even, and I've got a very special guest for you today. It's Dara Simkin, author of Full Stack Human and founder of Culture Hero. If you've ever reached the end of the day feeling completely exhausted despite doing everything right, then this episode is for you. Maybe, like many of the women I meet, you're managing a demanding career, you've got caring responsibilities, you're trying to keep your relationships healthy, you're trying to make time for exercise and well-being, and the endless logistics of modern life. On paper, it looks like everything's under control, but underneath it all, you feel frazzled, overwhelmed, or like you've lost touch with yourself and with what makes you feel alive. So I was delighted to chat with Dara Simkin. Her book, Full Stack Human, is all about exploring how we can upgrade our mindset in this busy, frazzled world that we live in. So we talk about achievement syndrome. We talk about some of the hidden assumptions behind our obsession with productivity. We talk about why our need for achievement and productivity becomes part of our identity, and what happens when our success no longer feels satisfying or like it's authentically ours. This conversation really challenged me, I have to say. One of the things Dara suggested was making space to do nothing. That really got me. So I recommend this episode if you're looking for a different way to think about work, your ambition, your well-being. It's deeply grounded in play, in self-compassion, in the capacity for strategic hope, and Dara's provocation on what it really means to feel alive. Let's get into it. Dara, it's such a pleasure to have you on Get Even. Welcome.
My pleasure, Nora. Good to be here and have a chat.
Congrats. You've just released Full Stack Human. So I really want to delve into your work. I know it'll help a lot of the members in our community here on Even who might be feeling a bit overloaded, tiny bit burnt out and frazzled. And I know that you've got a lot of insights drawing on your work in the domain of play that might help our community make sense of what they're feeling. And just, I'm going to start with, typical day for me. And then I know that a lot of women that we work with will connect to this. But a typical day for me can often look like, I'm time boxing work to within an inch of its life. Everything's mapped out. I know exactly what I need to do when I'm trying to maximize my productivity. I've scheduled everything perfectly. I'm making sure I get enough protein in the morning. I make sure that the kids, drop-offs, pickups, everything is scheduled, who's doing what, which parent is doing what. And, then I get to the end of the day and I'm making sure that I get enough exercise. So it's like I'm doing everything right, but I get to about 11 p.m. and my brain feels like it is just fried. It's like the inside of a busy train station. So I want to ask, from your perspective and your work that you've published for Full Stack Human, why, Dara? Why are we feeling so frazzled? Help us make sense of what's happening here.
Well, I think from a biological perspective, our brains are not actually wired to be dealing with this amount of pressure and this amount of change. I think also from a technology perspective, technology increases exponentially, and we just don't necessarily have the kind of DNA and the biology and the nervous systems to be able to navigate it. I mean, in the book, we talk very much about how we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. And what that kind of means in layman's terms is that we basically share 99% of our functional DNA with apes. So when you look at us compared to a monkey, we just kind of are a monkey with a fancy thinking cap. Yet we're being asked to, have mortgages and work 70 hours a week and bear children without being in community, and so many things that, really remove us from the way that we were sort of built from a anthropological perspective as a species. We're meant to be roaming the savannah. We're meant to be hunting and gathering. We're meant to be in community. And I think we're so far away from that. And we talk about in the book how we haven't really had a meaningful upgrade in hundreds of thousands of years when it comes to our brain. And even though we have our prefrontal cortex, which lets us think about thinking and helps us be organized and communicate and all that sort of thing, we just don't have the right systems in place that are really supporting us. And so when we look at, for example, going to work for 90,000 hours in our lifetime, our manager has as much effect on us as our partner. And living in and amongst these institutions that are not actually set up for human flourishing. And oftentimes, when you look at a business and a well-being program, for example, it's really looking at the person as the problem versus the system. It's not actually looking at what conditions are being designed for people to be able to sink or swim, basically. And it just the onus gets put on the person, which I think is grossly unfair because the amount of things that we are meant to juggle, especially if you're a female and a mother, that duality of being a professional woman and then also being the the mom who's got to make sure everybody's got clothes that fit them and that dinner is ready. And sure, there's been more progressiveness in the way that families now share the load, but I just still think there's an inordinate amount of pressure that's put on us. And I think the first thing that we really need to do in order to relinquish that kind of grief or guilt is know that it isn't our fault. And it's very easy to put the blame on ourselves because who else is there to blame? And sometimes it's tricky to wag your finger at the systems like government and education and work and all these things, and just you're kind of screaming into the void, right? And it's like, great, all the systems around me are fried and frayed, just like me. Where does that leave me?
Mm.
I think it can create a lot of disillusionment for people. And again, like you said, I'm doing all the right things and I'm ticking this box and I've got that and I'm doing this and I'm eating my protein or whatever it is. I think it's just allowing ourselves to have a moment to go, okay, it makes sense that I'm not coping because I am trying to do far too much. And so what do we do? How do we navigate that? And really it is to do with finding space for nothing.
Space
And
for nothing.
yeah, finding space for nothing. And I think being able to just have moments where you are just with yourself. And it sounds like an oversimplification. I don't try and sit and subscribe people to meditate or whatever it is. I think sometimes we just have to be okay with doing nothing and figuring out what triggers that in me of I'm not being productive and I'm not getting things done. And a lot of times we, especially as high achieving women, we connect our value with our output. If I'm not performing or creating or doing or whatever it is, who am I? And I think sometimes in order to connect to who we are, we need to just sit with ourselves. And that's really difficult.
Wow. That is terrifying. And I
Yeah.
think, you write a lot in the book about achievement syndrome and, like you've just said, connecting our value to our output or to performance. And so I'm wondering, to get to at least a level of comfort with doing nothing where you can actually do it,
Mm.
what advice would you have? And where does full stack human, where does it come in with, what's the entry point? How do we start to get to that ability to actually sort of just do nothing or create space?
Mm. For me and in my work, it's really about connecting to this sense of playfulness. And a lot of the times we treat play as a reward. We say, oh, I'm going to do that fun thing or go on that holiday or whatever it is after I do X, Y, and Z. But the reality is that X, Y, and Z just multiplies. And we never get that chance. And even when we do book that holiday, we end up getting sick because our nervous system finally has a moment to switch out of adrenaline and relax. And so it's really asking this question of what is filling your cup. And even though when we do things, we might feel this sense of achievement, it's actually not kind of connecting to the reality of what we need to feel energized. And I think when we are overachievers or high achievers in that process of becoming addicted to achievement through getting accolades in school and being told you're worthy because you got good grades or you're star of the netball team or whatever it is, and we pick up that need for achievement and validation very quickly. But I think the reality of our generation, especially like kind of millennials, is that our parents didn't really probably give us the attention and the validation that we needed. I know from my own experience, my parents never told me they were proud of me. They never told me that I was a good kid. And I was
Mm.
also undiagnosed ADHD. And I think a lot of women who probably you work with that even are high achieving because of neurodivergent tendencies and diagnoses and things like that later in life. And so we compensate because we're very resourceful and we're very vigilant. We overcompensate by achieving more and more to get the attention that we think that we need. And then we realize that doesn't do it for us anymore. It's like that served us when we were younger and we needed that to survive and we were great. And now we're like, ugh, that actually doesn't feel good anymore.
How do you think we get to that awareness of, this doesn't serve me anymore?
Well, I think you just kind of have a moment when you look in the mirror and you're like, what am I doing? Who am I? Maybe it's a fight with your partner, or you're just like sick constantly, or you're like a vegetable on the couch with your glass of wine watching Netflix. Just, I feel like sometimes it's just this moment, or this, like, we just get to this point where like we realize when we do something, it doesn't feel good anymore. And it's like, wait a minute, I've always been doing this thing to make me feel good, like getting the promotion or doing all the things or ticking off all of my to-do list. But then it's just like you just feel empty by the end. And I
Mm.
think some people arrive at that moment sooner. Other people might need a friend to let them know, or a therapist to tell them, or a hospitalization or something more extreme. But yeah, I think that we just kind of get to a breaking point almost, whether that is mentally or physically, where we realize this isn't serving me anymore. And so I think a lot of it is to do with, where's my energy going and am I getting it back? And I think really what we need to do is think about, like, who am I as a playful person? Who am I as a playful being? Because that is really who we are as an authentic human. We are our most authentic self when we're playful. I'm sure a lot of listeners have kids. You watch your children play, they are so present. They are so open, they're so curious, and we still have that capacity within us, but we've just learned so fiercely to perform that there's a delicate balance between being performative and playful. I learned to be performative as a way to get attention, to be funny and silly and witty and quick and all these things. But then am I doing that because it feels good and it fills me up, or am I doing it because I want to be liked or because I want to be accepted? And there's nothing wrong with wanting to have a sense of belonging, but I think sometimes delineating between who am I as my performative, put on my best, face and get people to like me vibes, versus who am I just as me, and who am I attracting and what am I doing, and how does my life look if I was actually more in authenticity and what brings me joy, versus thinking that I need to do something fun because that's what I should be doing because I'm unhappy, and forcing it. You can't force fun.
I want to delve into how can you find out what play looks like that is authentic to you? And what are some of you've kind of started talking about it there, but what might come up when we start to engage in play? What are some of the types of resistance that
Mm.
we might experience, or sort of, what do we have to get over in order to actually be and stay in that authentic play?
We can do something that's called a play history, which basically really looks at not only how we played, but how our family played when we were growing up. And sometimes this can be really triggering for people because if you had a traumatic upbringing, that doesn't necessarily feel accessible. And I've actually had participants, not often, but when I do explore this with businesses and we sort of talk about those moments, I've had people cry because it can be really triggering. Even though we're talking about play, it is a real fundamental driver of how we relate in the world, how we learned as a child. And so a lot of it is tied very much to our earlier years. And if we grew up in a family where it was very much performance driven, sometimes accessing that can be really difficult. So, kind of depending on your circumstance, you can think about what you loved doing as a kid, whether that was horse riding or collecting things or whatever it is, and just using that as a sort of thread to think about what that looks like for you as an adult. It doesn't have to be exactly like I liked riding horses when I was 7. I'm going to ride horses now, and might be hard. But maybe it's just about being around animals. Maybe you volunteer at an animal shelter, or just trying to be creative and not attach too much around the thing, but actually the way that it makes you feel. And I think the misconception around play is that it's a thing, it's an
Mhm.
activity or a doing, when actually it's a state of mind. It's a sense of being, it's a mode, it's a mood. It's actually part of our very kind of ancient emotional system. Same with like greed and lust and fear and seeking and care. Play is baked into our brain basically. And so what can you do that makes you feel in that mode? And sometimes for people, like I make a joke, two people could be on their computer. One person is on Excel, absolutely hating their life. And the other person is on Excel, living their best life. They're like color coding it and chucking in all of the formulas and like they're thriving. And, Excel is not necessarily inherently playful, but for someone who likes that organizing kind of thing, it could make them feel really good.
Mm.
And so sometimes I think we have too much of a myopic view around play, and we think that it's like I have to go and like learn how to surf or like do a paint and sip with 17 of my girlfriends, when actually it's just almost starting with this question of what if,
Hmm.
which opens up imagination, experimentation, possibility, and even kind of challenging the status quo of like, what if I tried this? Or what if the thing that I believed isn't true? And it's almost like being a bit of a scientist and exploring and experimenting. And if we're high performing and we connect our productivity to our identity, this idea of play feels frivolous and distracting. And what's the point? But actually it creates so much energy and aliveness in us. Like play makes us feel alive.
Mm.
And when we feel alive, we're going to do everything better. We're going to do our relationships better. We're going to do our work better. We're going to parent better. So it's like almost rethinking this idea of play as just like, what can I do to make me feel alive?
Yeah.
And
Wow.
it's a big question too. But oftentimes when we are so busy and we're so overwhelmed, we don't feel alive.
Yeah.
We're like a machine.
Yeah. I love that so much because I mean that is a really deep question, and I feel like, when we started our conversation, it can be so easy to get sort of trapped in doing the right things and not engaging with how do I go beyond living on autopilot? How do I go beyond meeting expectations that are external and sort of looking after everybody else? And how do I actually engage with, well, what makes me feel like alive and what gives me that sense of curiosity and joy? And I really also resonate with what you're saying around the subjectivity of play, how, like one person's Excel, like for me, that's not play like
Me
at
either.
all. But I know that the person who co-founded Even, like for her, that's genuine joy of like creating the systems, creating the color, creating the visuals. So I totally get what you're saying. So it's about kind of uniquely identifying or sitting with what might make you feel a certain spark or a curiosity, right?
Well, it's about being present, really,
Okay.
and being in flow. Like if you love Excel and you're jamming, you're in the flow. Like time and space is kind of irrelevant because you're so into it. We can really think of play as this idea of, is there connection involved? Because usually when we're playing, we want to be with someone else in our experience, because connection just makes everything again feel more alive and more human. Are you having fun? Are you actually, is there a sense of sort of enjoyment or glee that you're feeling in the thing that you're doing? And are you in this sense of presence? And I think because we're so far removed from the present moment, we're constantly worried about what's happened in the past. We're projecting ourselves into the future. When the beautiful thing about play is it is this real sense of presence in the moment. And so that's why I think sometimes when I said before, kind of going full circle around the nothingness,
Mm.
is just being able to be present. Like, and it doesn't necessarily even mean doing nothing. Like I sometimes just say like, what is it like to sit on the couch for 2 minutes? Not with your phone, not with music on, just feel the discomfort of being just with yourself.
That is scary. I don't know what it feels like for you, but for me, I'm like, okay, how do I get something done? And I can pinpoint. I mean, I think I've always been a productivity sort of obsessive, but I think also, especially coming into parenthood, just when you experience that time scarcity, I have this distinct memory of when my oldest was like a couple of months old, and I knew I had about 20 minutes for each nap. She wasn't a great sleeper. And so, and that really kickstarted my sort of like, okay, 20 minutes, that means I can hang one load of laundry and I can do like 5 minutes of yoga. Like, and that's how this whole optimization started. But it's like, how do you, okay, that might be a certain season of your life. And I often think you can then get stuck in it rather than kind of going, okay. So for me, when I look at the kids now being almost 9 and 6, it's actually there are these pockets of time and space that have opened up where they're just off playing by themselves, where actually the prospect of sitting on the couch for 2 minutes by myself, it can actually be half an hour. And yet I'm still stuck in like, what can I get done in this half an hour that will make me feel productive, calm, whatever, effective. I'm wondering, what tips do you have for breaking that circuit of just being obsessed with achievement syndrome and being obsessed with productivity, with efficiency? And I know I'm asking for myself right now, but really I'm asking for all of these other amazing women that I meet who are basically asking the same question.
Well, I think it's just being really honest with yourself and saying, is this working for me? And do I want to change? And we talk about the immunity to change framework in the book, which I love so much because it's such an accessible way to think about why you can't change. And it's not about being stubborn or, being lazy. It's not about that. It's actually this realization and going back to, again, understanding our own biology and our own kind of way that our brain works, is that if you think about it, we are wired to evolve and grow, and
Mm,
we're also wired to survive, which are in direct conflict of each other. So it's like trying to put your foot on the accelerator and the brake at the same time. And so we end up with this psychological tug of war internally, right? And so if we're not aware of that happening, we just are in constant conflict with ourselves, of like trying to push forward, but then something holding us back. And a lot of it is to do with fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of looking incompetent, fear of not getting enough done. And so when we think about the thing that we want to change, we have to be really clear about it and then go, okay, what am I doing or not doing that is stopping me from changing? What am I doing or not doing that's stopping me from getting out of this cycle of perpetual doingness, right? And you list all of these things, being very honest of what you're doing or not doing. Then the next iteration is to go, okay, what are my fears and worries that are sitting below what I'm doing or not doing? What fears and worries are driving that behavior? And then the last part, which is the most powerful, is what assumptions am I making that are creating those fears and worries, that is creating that behavior that is stopping me from changing? Because we have assumptions about ourselves, about the world, about success, about money, about status, all of this that we've just been programmed through our relationships and our family and our school and our religion or whatever it is, that are quietly running the background, that are driving almost everything that we do, which are also connected with our biases, how we deal with not having enough information or when there's not enough meaning or whatever it is. So we might be assuming something about success, for example. I have an assumption that if I'm not successful, that I'm not worthy.
mm,
And you might not even be thinking about that in your conscious mind. And so it's really sitting down and having a moment to reflect. Because if we don't create awareness about any of this stuff, it doesn't change. We can't just cross our fingers and go, ooh, I hope this happens. I've thought about it once for 5 seconds. I hope it changes. And once we start to unravel what those assumptions are, we go back to that question of what if that I mentioned earlier to challenge that assumption. What if I believed that if I wasn't successful, I still had value? What would that look like? And you just like kind of play with possibility there. We call it playful assumption awareness. Using that what if to go, okay, now I'm going to set myself a little experiment. I'm going to sit on the couch for 5 minutes, do the thing that I said I was going to do, and see what happens. Is my world going to come crumbling down? Is everyone around me going to tell me that I'm a useless piece of shit and I don't get anything done? And then once you kind of realize, and you want to set it to be very low stakes, right? Because you want to get positive feedback about it. And so that you try that little thing and you get positive feedback, you're like, okay, the world didn't end when I took 5 minutes. What if I took 10? And again, we just have to be willing to play with different ways of being. Like if we don't want to be one way, how do we play with being a different way? Because nothing is going to change if we don't have a willingness to try something else.
Yeah. I think that's really powerful because it's not just like Dara telling me to sit on the couch for 5 minutes. It's actually what you're combining there is the examination of like what are the assumptions that I'm making underneath and where do they come from and what are some of those, like you said, competing commitments that I'm still holding true to. But at the same time, what actually makes this even more powerful is that you're combining it with that playful experiment. So I don't stop at the interrogation of where has this originated and what's going on, what are the beliefs that I'm holding. You're actually saying have that experiment to gather the evidence to see that you can actually challenge yourself. So I think that together seems like a really powerful way rather than just somebody telling you, change your habits when like that's not the thing that's holding so many of us back.
Well, that's where kind of that idea of strategic hope comes in as well, because we need to have agency. It's like strategic hope is agency and a way forward. Yeah. And so when we do challenge our assumptions and we do ask this what if question and we are open to being curious and experiment, it gives us a chance to be hopeful that things can change. And that's another driver of possibility is going, okay, I have agency in the fact that I can try anything I want. I can do anything I want. I can experiment with whatever I want. But the trap and the thing that we have to be careful of is as a high achieving woman, don't set the bar so high that your experiment is like you're going to change your whole identity. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's sometimes where high achieving women, especially, can get stuck because it's like, give me the thing and I'm going to do it and it's going to be amazing. It's like, take that excitement and that kind of, the pizzazz and the chutzpah to do it, but save it, like chop it up into little bite-sized pieces, like don't just do the whole pizza pie, just like have a slice. And I think that's another thing that we have to be weary of is that when we are wanting to change as a high achieving woman, that we don't create this change that is so insurmountable and so unachievable that then we become more disillusioned and more disenfranchised about not being able to do it. It's just about holding things lightly, bringing in playfulness, being curious, asking what if, exploring possibility is just this ability to hold things lightly. And I think sometimes we create this relationship between seriousness and success.
Mm.
And it's not true. There's no data. I've tried. I've done it for so many years to try and find some data that says seriousness equals success. It doesn't.
That's so interesting. And I wonder if there's the inverse as well. So is it, does playfulness lead to connectedness? Does playfulness actually lead to people having agency to try something new? And I love in the book how you talk about hope as a verb as well.
Mm.
Is it a strategic capacity and is it an action that we can engage in order to cultivate the future that we actually want?
I mean, one of the things that I kind of came up with post the book and just getting feedback from people around how it was so freeing for them to kind of realize it's not them and giving language to a feeling that they've been feeling for so long, as well as the strategic co-piece. We talk about intelligent optimism, which is my co-author, Tane Hunter. He's a science communicator, and a lot of the work that he does is around our information diet. What information are we taking in on a daily basis? And to be optimistic in the sense that we are seeking out fact-based evidence that there is possibility and the world isn't warped,
Mhm.
very easy for us, especially with algorithms and the way that social media is set up, to just constantly feed us doom and gloom because, like that sells, right? And they know that. And so we have to actively go out and seek evidence that a better future is being built. And it's sort of this idea of dialectical thinking or this idea of yes and where yes, things are warped and they're getting better. And we can use that kind of yes and concept internally as well, where we can say, yes, I am productive and I am calm. Like we when we try and put ourselves into a binary, we end up just berating ourselves when we go off course even just a little bit. And so this idea from intelligent optimism comes what I call intelligent self-compassion, where especially when you're a very cerebral, very high achieving intellectual human, finding evidence to have self-compassion for yourself, not just because your therapist told you to be kind, or you read a blog, or you saw a pillow in your naturopath's office that said, be kind, or whatever it is, like you actually go and find information, which is why I love the book so much, because it's actually giving fact-based reasons why it's not your fault. And in order to have self-compassion for ourselves, to be able to then stop interrogating and antagonizing and beating ourselves up for not doing the thing, comprehension creates compassion. Same thing for other people. We have more compassion for other people when we can understand what's going on for them. So the more information we have around what's going on for ourselves, the more self-inquiry we do, the more we explore our assumptions and how we show up in the world, we can have self-compassion and go, oh, I've been doing that thing for so long because I needed to, because that is what helped me survive, but I don't need to do that anymore. What is my way forward? So yeah, I think there's just, again, going back to the idea of holding things lightly is such a powerful way to start to break the chains that bind us into this idea of, I need to be successful and I need to, do all the things that make me feel like I'm worthy.
Yeah. I mean, the phrase that you had there of giving yourself compassion for understanding where some of your behavior has come from and understanding that you needed to do that and then letting it go. I love that. That's sort of, yeah, just engaging with yourself in a different way is what you're really encouraging us to do. And I also, I'm reminded of what the book does in a sense is because it combines the sort of the moment that we're at where AI has accelerated our access to information. It's sort of, we're now always multitasking and trying to run a process while we're, doing something else. So getting our agent or 5 or 10 different agents to run, a couple of things here while we're doing that. And it's like we now fill every 2 minutes with something. And I do wonder if the book actually meets this moment perfectly, because it's also, for me, the topic of play. You're kind of bringing us back to our body as well, right? You're connecting us with what it is to be human again, and reminding us that actually we're not just sort of cognitive and cerebral machines, but we're embodied, and there's value in that, and there's actually a cause to celebrate that. So I'm just wondering, as a final kind of seg into the moment that we're at, whether you've got any reflections or better words to connect than I've just done, how this book really is like a way to help us make sense of the times that we live in.
Well, going back to that embodied piece, we talk about embodied adaptability. This idea of being adaptable is like the number one skill that we need in business right now. And it's kind of being bastardized in a way of like, here are 5 steps on how to be more adaptable or whatever it is, when actually embodied adaptability is recognizing and understanding that you have a nervous system, and your nervous system responds to what's happening in the moment. And it also reacts to what's happening in the moment. And there's a big distinction between responsiveness and reactiveness. A reactive nervous system is one that is in fight or flight, that is oozing with cortisol, and that is going to absolutely send you into a spiral of feeling frazzled and fried and frayed and possibly burnt out. A responsive nervous system is a nervous system that is still amongst the chaos, but is able to ground themselves in the present moment, ground themselves into a sense of self, a sense of awareness, where whatever shit is being thrown at you, you're able to still be flexible. You're able to flex your thinking. You're able to flex your stance. You'll be able to listen to what other people are saying. And there's not this sense of kind of rigidity. Because I think a lot of times when we are high achieving, we have a comorbidity of wanting to be in control, because being in control makes us feel safe. When it's like, what are we actually feeling unsafe about that we need to feel control for? And again, a lot of times it's hangovers from previous experiences that we bring in, which are not processed. And I think what also we need to be prepared for when we're doing this work is to be able to grieve. And in the book, we talk about the difference between resistance and grief. And a lot of times when we're not ready to change, or we do feel like we're pushing up against something, we feel like there's a resistance there, but it's actually, we just need to grieve. We need to grieve something that's happened, or something that's lost, or something that, we talk about how grief is a change that we didn't want to happen. And even with a lot of women who are high achieving, if you have kids, sometimes you're grieving the high achieving woman, when you were in your late 20s, early 30s, that had, you were queen of the world and could do whatever you want, whenever you wanted, and fly around the world, and, whatever it was. And being able to recognize those moments of transition, grieving them and giving them the space that they need, where you feel sad and you ugly cry, and you just allow yourself to be in that space. I have a playlist on Spotify called Feelings, where when I have been very heady, when I've been go, 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 do, 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 and I know I'm just like a floating head, I'm like, I'm just going to lay in bed and listen to Enya and see what happens. And 9 times out of 10, I'm bawling my eyes out because I'm so anxious or overwhelmed or depleted or whatever it is, that I just need to like wail and allow myself to do that. So I think from an embodied adaptability perspective, we have to be able to lean into those uncomfortable moments and feel them so that they pass. And so I think it's, just attuning into yourself and what you need, and knowing that you are an emotional body and that needs to be felt.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually okay.
It's actually great. It actually will make you a more capable human. And I think that's the thing. We're so removed from what it actually means to be a high functioning human. Like our what we identify as high functioning is grossly away from what it means to be well and grounded and calm and collected. You know what I mean? Again, going back to unraveling some of this stuff around success and things like that. For me, success is ease.
Mm.
And that's something that's really shifted in me a lot since I wrote the book and did the research. It's like, I just want ease in my life. And it doesn't mean that life's going to be easy, but how do I make space for not having to live in the chaos all the time? And what do I need to kind of let go of or invite in to make that possible?
What's amazing about that is that it seems like it's a thoughtful definition that you've cultivated and created. And I often think about that as well. Just what's the definition of success if it's not some sort of default that we've inherited, and we're just driving towards something that we've never examined and asked whether that's actually our version of it. So I love that. Dara, I feel like I've had a personal therapy session here just for the last 40 minutes. There's so much of what you shared that deeply resonates with me and that I know will resonate with our community. I hope your work inspires them to examine a lot of the internal assumptions that they're kind of walking around with that are actually preventing their authentic versions of play, their authentic versions of success, and what they really want to go for in life. So thank you so much for being here on Get Even. It's been an absolute joy.
My pleasure. And if people want to check out the book, it's available on Amazon. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm always sharing tips and tricks and things like that. You can check out my website is darasimkin.com, or my business is called Culture Heroes. But I do hope that the women who are listening, find a way to rethink their definitions of success and ease and achievement and the things that are really driving their behavior. Is that yours, or is it someone else's? And how can you make it yours?
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dara.
My pleasure. Thanks, Nora.
I'm Dr. Nora Koslowski, co-founder of Even, where our mission is to accelerate women's economic potential. Check out even-careers.com to learn how we support women and business to get even.